Many of our students who are from disadvantaged families or have economic hardships often bringing with them significant trauma histories. But trauma is not a respecter of wealth or lack of wealth. Trauma comes from some of our most advantaged families. We can replace the term trauma with chronic stress. Sometimes I talk about chronic stress over time. Think about those kids who are really pressed constantly for achievement and achievement and achievement and doing more and doing more and doing more. That overall chronic stress gets internalized and becomes brain-based behavior after a while. I am really hoping in our district that while we are using trauma-informed strategies, we are implementing compassionate schools, which is a model out of Washington State that was written, the curriculum I have with me, you probably have it in your packet, the heart of learning and teaching, implemented in Washington State, implemented it in some ways in San Diego. There's some replication of that in Delaware through the work of Ron Hertel and one of the authors who's working with us in doing some training. So we're implementing compassionate schools, but what we're really trying to do, and the reason I titled the presentation what I did, is we're trying to change the work from just being about trauma to what do we do about it? Let's build resiliency. What do we want our kids to do? We want them to be able to face whatever comes their way and be able to do that with a degree of success and be able to come out and have positive outcomes. To be able to get a job, be able to hold a job, be able to go to college, be able to do the things that they need to do. So resiliency is really what matters with us. So in all of the work that we're doing, we're talking with our administrators, we're talking with our teachers about building resiliency using trauma-informed strategies. Nisha mentioned a grant that we received. We received a U.S. Department of Ed elementary and secondary school counselor grant last year that began this work. Within that grant, we called it the class grant, counselor leaders addressing school safety. We looked at how can we use our existing frameworks and build upon what we have to put in place a trauma-informed environment. This came from a lot of work that we're doing within the community, and one of the lessons that we have learned, I'm doing a little bit of article for Nation, for EdNC, and about the lessons we've learned. And one of the lessons we've learned is that when you start this work, it works best if you put it into an existing framework. Try to find something that exists. So we have a district-wide implementation of PBIS, and we're building an MTSS multi-tiered system of support framework starting next year in a state PPI model for MTSS. So putting compassionate schools within that framework makes sense. What did we do for all students? What did we do for some students who need some real specific kinds of things? And what did we do for a few of those students who really need those intensive kind of services at the top of the tier? What we do know is that what I don't like about some of the triangles that exist around MTSS is that you split out the academic over here and the behavior over here. It's very rare that we have a student with behavior needs who also doesn't have academic needs. So it's really one triangle. It really is one and not two that meet each other. What happens with students in their social and emotional learning also impacts their learning. We see that in the October edition of Ed Leadership was all about social emotional learning and its impact on academic learning. Many articles in there that address that look at significant impact on that. So we look at that training. We look at also building comprehensive school counseling programs. Any school counselors in here? Old school counselors. We have a lot of models in North Carolina of really good recognized ASCA model programs. We have none in the west part of the state. There are none that exist that I know about west of about Winston-Salem. So we're going to change that. We want to look at the legislation that's currently come down about comprehensive school counseling programs. We want to look at the evaluation instrument that came from DPI about what does a comprehensive school counseling program look like when you're evaluating your counselors. We want to turn those counselors into professionals that really work with looking at implementing mental health. That is the professional in the school setting that has a good knowledge of mental health strategies and how to meet the needs of kids who are coming into our schools with trauma. So we wanted to look at that. One of the required goals of this grant was to reduce the school counselor student ratio. So we added about 4.5 positions in our elementary area. And what this did was we had about 4 schools that were 150 students or less that are pretty rural schools. And they only had a part-time counselor. You can't really do a comprehensive school counseling program when you're only there 20 hours a week. And so we were able to add a full-time counselor to each of those, and that added the additional FTEs. We also put in place a social emotional learning curriculum. We used an evidence-based model, the second step. It is certainly the core of what we do. It's not all of what we do around social emotional learning, but it provides a core and a structure for us that is an evidence-based model to teach social emotional skills. I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like in just a little while. So the other thing that we're doing is using our data. It's the last tier. We are using the data that we collect already from our PBIS model, which is our attendance, our discipline, our academic scores. We're putting some of those things into dashboards so that they're readily available, especially in our middle school area. But we're also pulling them from other ways that give us some visual representation of it. And we're trying to put that in place, not just in looking at it with PBIS, but putting that information available to our teachers as they do professional learning communities and using their data to say, how is this impacting students, rather than simply looking at academic strategies in those professional learning communities. And we also added the Devereaux Social Skills Assessment, which is something we purchased with a grant, which is a measurement of social skills attainment. It's a strengths-based assessment that we do a screening of all of our students, K-5. It's an 8-item screening that we can identify students who may need more attention, and those who are typically developing around social emotional skills. So that's the universal screener and that tiered model. The Devereaux also has a tier 2 screener for those students who are showing up as being in need in some area. So it becomes a 32-item assessment that we can look at more detail. This detail helps our counselors to identify who needs more pre-teaching or reteaching of those skills, who may need some real small group counseling, individual counseling around certain development of certain skills. And then for those who are not making progress after you put in place strategies, there's a third tier of strategy that looks at how do we identify the needs that may be met best by mental health or by other agencies or by parents, and pulling in other supports to meet that need. So what does it look like in a classroom? And that's what we're going to do. So I want to change the presentation a little bit from last night to try to get you involved a little bit. We teach strategies that can be built into the school day that only take a couple of minutes here and there that help our students learn self-regulation skills, helps our teachers practice self-regulation skills. Some of those include mindfulness, and mindfulness we kind of demystify to be, what do you do to keep yourself in the present, get in touch with what sensations that you're feeling, and being able to begin in control of your body. So that's what mindfulness is, and kind of demystify that whole idea. The other is yoga. Yoga, what yoga does is introduces tension and stress, physical tension into the body, and then teaches us to relax the tension. And it teaches us to manage our sensations. We also use a lot of strategies from a program called the Community Resiliency Model out of the Trauma Resource Institute. So we're going to practice a couple of those things that we do in the classroom, and we may do them periodically. So everybody stand up. We're going to do something we call rocket breath. This is an activity that you can do at the beginning of the day. You can do as you start getting into a very difficult subject. You can do something after there's been a behavior disruption that you really need to bring people back together. There's a little tension and anxiety. So if you'll hold your hands out in front of you. And what I want you to do is, you can close your eyes, you can keep them open, whatever you do, but I want you to imagine between your hands all of those things that you're bringing into the room today that cause you tension and stress. What are those things that you're worried about, things that are on your mind, things that may be causing you some degree of a little bit, oh, I've got to do that this afternoon. I wish I didn't have to do that. Wish I didn't have to do that presentation tomorrow. Boy, I'm worried about that drive home. There's going to be so much traffic. Put all of those things right in there, and then put your hands together and rub really fast. Feel the heat, feel the pressure, feel those things between your hands getting softer and softer and softer, just like they were Play-Doh. Hold your hands this way. Breathe in. Rocket breath. out. Breathe in. Rock your breath. Breathe out. One more time. What's left of all of those things put between your hands. Breath really, really fast. Really, really fast. Feel the heat. With that heat, all of those things are dissolving. Whatever's left of that tension and stress is leaving your body. One more time. Rock your breath. In. Out. In. Out. Breathe deeply, breathe calmly. Let your shoulders drop. And now we're ready to begin again. Takes 2 minutes. Takes 2 minutes to go through an activity like rock your breath. By introducing these during the day, periodically through the day, starting the day with these kinds of activities, it really re-engages the brain. You feel the grounding, the grounding of the pressure between your hands. You feel the calmness of your breathing. You get in touch back and get the brains back, get your brain back online. So what we know, even from as long ago as we all studied Maslow when we were in college. When we look at the cognitive needs, where does academic learning occur? Middle to toward the top of Maslow's triangle. All of the other things that we're trying to meet with doing trauma-informed care are the safety needs, the psychological needs, the love and belongingness, building esteem, building positive regard. Those are the kinds of things that Compassionate Schools does. Those are the things that we're really working on building to enhance the learning of our students. So let's talk about the brain. Fancy way of looking at the brain. Dr. Dan Siegel uses the hand, and we use this as we teach students because it's a real visual symbol of what happens with the brain, and it becomes a visual sign that we can cue kids into what's happening with them and trigger a different response. So when we talk about the brain, we talk about the wrist and the bottom, the base of the hand being the brainstem. That's where all of our autonomic kinds of things, our breathing, our respiration, our sense of touch, our senses come from what happens in the base of the brain. In the midbrain, we have our limbic system, where all of those hormones are triggered. The adrenaline, the cortisol, the kinds of things that tell us that something's happening that we have to get ready for. We have to do something about it. We either have to stand up and fight it, we have to flee, we have to run, we have to defend ourselves. That happens within here by the creation of those hormones that exist. And this little thumb, the thumb represents the amygdala. When we're talking to kids, we talk about this is your alarm bell. We have a little glove that we sometimes put on when we're talking to kids that has a little bell on the end. That's the alarm bell. It goes off and says, you gotta get ready to do something here. So it's the amygdala. With little kids, we call it the barking dog. Something's in the yard, and what does your dog do? It starts barking, lets you know that you gotta do something, you gotta be prepared. So we talk about that. So when the amygdala engages and the limbic system starts producing all of those negative hormones that over time build up in our body, what we have to control it with is the cortex. To be able to wrap our thinking brain around that amygdala and around that limbic system to re-engage the thinking brain. So you will see teachers in some of our schools that we've trained using here's where you are, wrap your thinking around, it's calm. And it is a visual signal to folks to start using some of the other strategies that we've taught, the breathing, the grounding. We're going to do more of those as we go through the session. So it becomes a very visual symbol of what happens with the brain that we can use with children. John Medina is a neuromolecular biologist out of Seattle, wrote a book called Brain Rules. And we sometimes use this as an introductory book study for faculties because Brain Rules talks about 12 rules that exist that impact, about how trauma impacts us both physically and about how it impacts learning. It's a very similar book that was written about physical exercise, written by Dr. John Rady, called Spark, that's also very good that we sometimes use. But both of those are about how to use physical activity, how to use other strategies to re-engage the thinking brain. Because we know that stressed brains don't learn like other brains. So what happens in a stressed brain? Well, both sides of these things that happen. We have noticeable effects, like we see an increase in our respiration. We feel it. We feel our bodies getting tense. We feel, you know, our muscles are being saturated with oxygen, so we're getting ready to run. You know, we sweat. We have chest pains. Our pupils dilate. But what happens that we don't see that. We don't see that adrenaline being released. We don't see that. You've got to get that little funny tummy feeling where your stomach kind of hurts. You know, when you're getting ready for that preparation, you get that butterflies in your stomach. You get all of those things that happen. Your digestion slows, and all of those body reactions happen. So what does it look like in students? The fight, flight, or freeze. What does it look like in classrooms? That's the left side. When we see our kids who have that uncharacteristic crying, the poor grades, the tension in the classroom, that they're distracted. Many of our adolescents, you'll see the alcohol, the drugs, as an attempt to cope. It's a coping strategy to deal with what's happening in their brains, that is anxiety and stress. Breaking rules, truancy, avoiding school because it's hard, it's difficult, it's stressful, and things are triggered there. So what do the triggers look like? Why do we see this happening in schools? The triggers look very different. Can we really prepare for all of those triggers? You know, when you go from one of the triggers being calm and quiet, because sometimes with our students, when things get calm and quiet, bad things happen. And trauma happens when things get calm and quiet. To really, the noise and the unpredictability triggers them. So can we really prepare for all of those? Maybe, maybe not. But what we can do, even if we can't avoid the triggers, we can teach our students ways that they can face those things and still be in control of what happens within their bodies. And we can't always do it by simply teaching them to think through them. We have to teach them first to feel them in their bodies, know what they feel like, and then know how to react. This was a study that came out of Washington State. I've stolen some of Ron Hertel's slides with his permission, but this is a study from Washington State. I believe this was with freshmen or sophomores in high school. When you look at this, the adverse childhood experience from the Filetti and the studies that says that if you have 3 or more adverse childhood experiences, you're considered really significant in terms of having negative impacts on the body and on the brain's ability to respond. So when we look at a typical classroom, this was out of Washington, I don't think it's any different if I'm in Lake County or anywhere in North Carolina, that there are about only 6 students in a classroom of 30 that have no ACEs. There are about 5 students that have 1 adverse childhood experience. About 6 students with 2. I still can think that 2 ACEs is pretty significant in a classroom, but you don't know what those are. 3 students with 3, 7 with 4 or 5, and 3 with 6 or more. That's 43% of a classroom that have 3 or more ACEs. That's a lot of trauma that is brought into our classroom. So what does it look like in terms of learning? When we're looking at PLC strategies, our traditional approaches as educators have been to look at, if kids are not learning academically, let's look at our educational strategies. Are they working? Let's change the educational strategies to see if we can have better outcomes. But what if the cause of that is not the strategy that we're using educationally? What if the cause of that is the emotional trauma that they're bringing into the classroom? Is the educational strategy going to change that? Probably not. So social emotional learning and the kinds of things that this committee is doing become ever more important as we start working on how to make a greater impact in educational achievement of the population of students who are coming in, with about 43% of our population coming in with significant trauma that's impacting their ability to pay attention and focus on what's being taught during the day. So what we know from ACEs and school performance is that students with 3 or more ACEs are 2.5 times more likely to fail a grade, perform lower on academic standardized tests, have language difficulties, language development slows because of what happens within the brain. The language development, their ability to express what's happening with them is delayed. They are suspended and expelled more. they are much more likely, about twice as likely to be referred for special ed and referred and placed in special ed classrooms affecting their achievement, have poorer health, and therefore miss more days of school. So not only are we limiting their exposure to academics, we are handicapping them and being able to access the good educational strategies that are offered. And I do believe that they are offered across our school systems in North Carolina. So what do? We can overcome trauma with building resilience. There has to be a shift in our thinking away from diagnoses and what's wrong with kids to what happened with students. There has to be that shift in our thinking. When we see challenging behavior, when we see things happening within our schools, that it's not about coming up with what's a diagnosis. Are they PTSD, or are they bipolar, or are they ADHD? We have to look at the child that we have is what we have. So what's wrong? What happened? What is the impact of what happened on their ability to learn? Because we can build I can't build an intervention around a diagnosis. Diagnoses, they have some commonalities, but they're so different across populations. If I know what's wrong and what are the triggers of what's happening with students and what happened to them, I can probably build some supportive services around that student that allows them to feel safe and comfortable in the classroom. So in our students, we see that ability to attach. So we work on building relationships, with the teacher, getting those teachers and counselors and other folks in the building, administrators, librarians, cafeteria workers, all of the folks in our building to be relationship coaches, teaching and modeling what good relationships are, prompting and building groups around students who need to build those skills so that they can practice good social skills. We can teach communication and connectedness. We can teach how to communicate, how to ask for help, how to say, I don't like what you did to me. We can teach skills that are about communication and connectedness. We can build groups that allow kids to interact with each other and get positive feedback about that interaction. We can also teach empathy, compassion, and respect. And we very much teach emotional regulation. We practice it, we build it into the course of the day. Now, can I say that every one of our classrooms is doing this all the time? Probably not. We're in our infancy with doing this model. But I'm seeing it more and more. I was in a classroom the other day, and they had been doing yoga. It's very evident that the whole group had done yoga. They had done some chair yoga that I saw doing. But I also saw a little fellow that I'd been at a conference with. He's 6, 7 years old. I'd been at a conference with he and his parents and his foster parents. And in the course of that conference, we were just talking. I checked off about 5 or 6 of the ACEs that the student had experienced in his 5 or 6 years. He had learned some yoga. The class had done yoga. But he was having a hard time. He's had a hard time. He's in his third school already because of some placements and some moving around. So I saw the kid get a little squirmy, a little escalating, and just simply with a trigger, that a signal from the teacher, he had a yoga mat in the back, and he went back and he practiced his yoga poses, and he breathed, he did his yoga poses, and then he came back and he sat back down and he started back to work. Those are the kind of strategies we want to see implemented across our schools. That was a tier 2 strategy for this young man because it was an individualized strategy for him. It was a universal strategy for the classroom. We'll teach everyone, but anyone who needs to do that during the day can do that in that classroom. To take 2 to 3 minutes, it didn't take long, to go practice emotional regulation and to get back engaged with the academic structure of the day. I truly believe that young man will be successful as we continue to evaluate his academics. What we know is that survival trumps exploration and growth. So when the survival instinct is engaged in our students, they're really not out there trying to engage in exploratory learning and learning new things. It's really much more about, I've got to do what I need to do to take care of myself right now. Right now. So the safer that we can make them feel within our classrooms, the more likely we are to engage them in that exploration and learning. And last but certainly not least is that we know that trauma impacts all of our executive functioning skills, our ability to plan, our ability to sustain attention. So trauma often looks like ADHD. We are very fortunate because in our community in Buncombe County, we are actually a trauma-informed community of practice. We have multiple agencies who are using trauma-informed practices, including our Department of Health and Human Services. They assess many of our pediatric practices, mental health agencies. We even have folks who are trauma-based practitioners who are doing ACEs screenings in our jails, and as we see folks do. So one of the things that we have been working with a group of pediatricians on in a pediatric collaborative, and I do meet with the pediatric collaborative and a group of physicians regularly. They have been working on moving the diagnoses of ADHD away from psychiatrists and developmental pediatricians back to the family practice physicians, and introducing into that assessment of ADHD, can we rule out trauma as a cause? Can we rule out adverse childhood experiences as a cause for the ADHD diagnosis? And if it is trauma, what can we put in place first before we make a diagnosis and put on and use medication? Now, medication may be necessary and it may work, but can we put in place other things that lets us look at those kinds of things? So we're at sustaining attention. But we also want to teach reasoning and teach problem solving and teach planning. Okay? How many of you are survive with your planner, with your calendars? Most of us do. Do kids naturally know how to do that? Probably not. So why don't we teach them how to plan, how to organize? So we have to introduce those kind of things as taught strategies as we work with our students. That paradigm shift is that trauma is not a cognitive experience, it's a sensory. We feel it. When you're stressed, you're really not, what really causes you the problem is not what you're thinking about, but the stress that it causes in your body. You feel it before you think it. You're often not aware of what the stress is. Most of us, just think about what's happened over the last month or so in our world. Most of us now live with a little bit of stress about our safety and our own personal well-being. We internalize that stress over time. So it's what we feel. We don't think about it all day long. We really don't. But we have that constant sense of stress. So reducing that arousal level is something that we want to try to integrate into what we do. Another activity. This is really, really easy. It takes less than a minute to do. So still sitting. If each of you would grab the bottom of your chair, I hope you're made to do this. School chairs certainly are. I'm not sure about these nice leather ones that we have here. We don't usually get these in classrooms. But if you would grab the bottom of the chair, and what I want you to do is I want you to pull up while you're pushing your body down. Keep your feet flat on the floor in front of you. Press down on the floor with your feet. Press up on the bottom of your chair and down with your body. Feel the tension in your shoulders. Feel the tension in your legs. Make sure that you're making contact with the ground and you feel that your feet are pressing into the floor. You feel that tension. Now again, breathe deeply in. And as you breathe out, reduce the tension in your arms. Let your legs relax. They come a little bit off the floor. Feel the tension leaving your body. And one more time, pull up as hard as you can. Feel the tension in your body. Feel it working. Feel your heart pumping. Breathe in. Breathe out. Release that. Again, breathe in. Breathe out. Let your shoulders relax. Feet off the floor. Are you ready to learn? You just re-engaged your brain again. You're ready to learn again. So it's reducing that arousal level. There is not a teacher around who is not able to look around their classroom and see when the class is beginning to get a little antsy. That antsiness, that little movement that you see is recognizing that arousal level is going up just a little bit. If we do this before standardized testing, we kind of reduce some of the anxiety around standardized testing. You got your 2-minute break in the middle of your standardized testing. Can you do a little bit of grounding? It's really grounding and getting you connected and relaxed again and re-engage your brain. Absolutely, you can do this kind of thing. So what this tells us is as long as the student's not feeling safe and in control, that this around state makes it difficult to process verbally. How many of you ever had to really work with a really, really angry student? Do they hear what you say? Do they process what you're talking about? Sometimes we talk them to death. And sometimes that talking them to death escalates them even more. So what we need to do is stop talking, right? I say this to us all the time. I keep talking to him and he keeps, I said, let's stop talking. Let's stop talking. Yeah. Have them do some breathing, do some grounding, use some other strategies to help them focus and be able to re-engage that cognition that allows them to process what you're saying to them verbally. So the most immediate short-term and long-term intervention must be designed to restore that sense of safety and control. So there are things that we can do to address climate that are essentially about safety and control. We want to put those in place in looking at our strategies, our structure, our predictability of what we do, our scheduling, how do we teach and model planning. All of those things bring safety and control to our students. Compassionate schools, just as attitudes, knowledge, and skills that we want to teach, is that our attitudes as educators is that students can be successful in schools despite their traumatic experiences. They can be successful. All of our students can be successful in spite of that traumatic experience. A trauma-sensitive framework works for all students, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of wealth, regardless of what they bring in and their cognitive skills. It works for all students. So when we're putting in place those safety and supportive strategies and re-engaging the brain, we're re-engaging everybody's brain, not just those who are working with trauma. And teachers alone cannot meet the needs of students impacted by trauma. So it takes our counselors, it takes our social workers, it takes our cafeteria workers, it takes our custodians, it takes our bus drivers, because many of what we see is that our students having difficulty is on the buses. The knowledge is that trauma adversity can have an impact on academic performance, behavior, and social function. So we've got to do something about it. We also need to engage families. Students, when they're coming from trauma backgrounds or having history, often the families are very much involved with that. I've seen a significant impact of domestic violence on students and coming in and feeling safe in the classrooms. In fact, our community had several really negative experiences with community violence, and several ended in multiple deaths due to domestic violence within our community a couple of years ago, prompting our community in a trauma-informed model to develop a family justice center, to bring all the resources for domestic violence into one building through counseling, through law enforcement, through defense, public defenders, all of it within the one building so that folks don't have to tell their stories 15 times to get help. So it is very trauma-informed model. But working with our families is so important. So I worked with a family advisory group, and I was having difficulty really engaging and getting folks to my advisory group, and stopped fighting the battle. There was already an existing group of parents who were meeting. And I went to them and said, would you be my advisory group for my grant? And oh yes, we're excited about that. So I have a group of about 20 parents now that are so active and engaged and excited about our work. Lastly, we need to look at our policies. What are we doing that impacts, what are we doing by our standard procedures that either trigger or do not support the approach of learning, social emotional learning? Do we really allow a time during our day
if we really believe that social emotional learning impacts academics, do we really want to give a portion of our day to teach it? It can be integrated into a lot of academics, and we want it to be integrated into the academic structure of the day. But if it's important to know, and it's important for our kids to be able to achieve, then we need to make it part of core. We talk about core instruction. And my definition of core is probably pretty vague and probably pretty general. My definition of core is anything that we consider to be important for kids to know and learn to be able to be successful. That's my broad definition of core. Math and reading and all of those good science and all of those things are certainly core components of our instruction. But so is social emotional learning. It is so important for us to have that as part of our core content. We are working on the multiple mental health professionals. We have school-based therapists who work in our schools. We're really working to provide an integrated framework. So we teach self-regulation, we teach resiliency, we teach executive functioning, and we teach social emotional competencies. That's what we do as part of the Compassionate School. We teach it, we provide opportunities to practice. Even the whole structure of the Compassionate Schools curriculum is structured around trauma and compassion and resiliency, the understanding what that means and from brain-based behavior. But the next thing that's the most important is something that we really focus on is you can't do it unless you teach teachers and administrators to take care of themselves. That we all bring into our educational environment our own adverse childhood experiences, our own stresses that we bring in during the day. And unless we have a way to be in touch with what's happening with us, we will trigger other folks in our classrooms. We will trigger the kids in our schools. If we're not able to be in control and re-engage our own brains to have a rational response to the behavior that we see during the day. It's not an affront to us. It is a coping strategy that is brain-based. So we tell our teachers and our folks, it's an ethical obligation. It's not just something you should do. It's an ethical obligation to practice self-care. So often when we're beginning, when teams of schools are planning their Compassionate Schools model, they begin with self-care. They engage the staff around self-care strategies to say, let's see, it really feels good. You feel really good when folks take care of you. Our students will feel good when we take care of them. Chapter 3 really goes into what does it look like, some of the strategies we're doing here, and some other strategies that we teach. Brings in place, what does it look like in a classroom? How do you integrate it throughout the day so that you're still allowing for a lot of academic learning time? And then what we do really well, I think, in our community is have a total involvement of our community. From doctor's practices to our school nurses and all of those things that we do. Compassionate Schools is both about what we teach and how we teach. So we teach strategies, but it's how we teach. By always making sure that we're empowering students to practice what they know, by providing unconditional positive regard, because we know that helps build those brain connections back. Neuroplasticity says that those connections can be built back with positive interactions. We can build those connections back to do that. By maintaining high expectations, it's not about lowering what we expect kids to do, it's teaching them how to meet those expectations. Most importantly is checking our assumptions. Even when we come from a trauma-informed place, we can make assumptions about why kids do things. And we have to check those assumptions at the door and talk to students about, well, what's going on? What's happening? What can you do differently? And check those assumptions so that we're not like, sometimes if we make assumptions, we can either lighten up and not hold them accountable, which is not always the right thing to do, or we can make assumptions that, well, they're just doing this and they just want our attention, they just want that, and then we react in the way we should. Talk about being a relationship coach. And last but not least is providing guided opportunities for helpful participation, giving them responsibility, giving them jobs to do,
making them responsible, making them feel like they have a sense of purpose. Because the other thing that we haven't talked about in terms of what happens with trauma is that sometimes it results in a decreased sense of personal agency, that students who come from a sense of trauma feel that defeated sense of, well, it really doesn't matter what I do because it's not going to make a difference. So by giving them some responsibility, by giving them jobs to do, by giving them some really positive feedback for being able to do that, we try to teach them that sense of personal responsibility. What you do does make a difference. You can make this better. So we really try to build that personal agency sense. So what happens? We've had two cohorts trained so far in Compassionate Schools model. We have one cohort of 8 and another supposed to be 6 and turned out to be 5. So we got 13 of our 26 elementary and intermediate schools who have been through the initial training with Ron Hertel. And Ron brought one time with him, when he's made 2 trips. One was with a school administrator who uses this model within her school and has seen some significant difference. The second time was with a school counselor who was from an Indian reservation in Washington State, where they had had a shooting where I think about 4 students were killed the year before. And you probably read about that or remember seeing it in the news. She was the school counselor in the area and talked about the healing process from that truly traumatic event that impacted their schools. So different perspectives, but very, very beneficial for us to learn from both of those. So each of the schools who are represented, and we do a lot of work up front to get the buy-in of administrators. I personally go and visit and talk with and present and try to get the connection with the administrator. But they bring a team of folks, including an administrator, a school counselor, a school social worker, a school nurse, their mental health therapist from the public agency, a parent, if we could get parent involvement to come with that group. We have some other agencies that were represented in that training. One was our Children First Community in Schools representative who's working within some of our elementary schools on community resource centers. We had some folks from Community Care of Western North Carolina, which is an agency that provides care coordinators in a lot of our pediatric practices. I had folks from DSS there. I had one person from juvenile court who came to the training when we did our initial training. So we try to make it a community involvement. And then within the day or two of training that we do that introduces it, there is time built in for the teams from each school to talk about how will they take this back and work with it within their building. So when they leave after a couple of days, they have a structure for what am I going to do and who am I going to talk to? Who else do I need to pull into our planning at the school level? What's our next step? What are our needs of our building? Or what data do we need to go back and collect in our building to talk about what it looks like in our building? Yeah. So, because it doesn't have to look the same. This is a framework, it's a set of skills, it's a set of strategies that you can use and make available to people, but it doesn't have to look the same in every building. PBIS doesn't look the same in every building. Yeah, it's a framework, it's a structure that you can use. So each team kind of works with others at their school to look at their needs, and then we provide coaching from our grant coordinator. I have a grant coordinator who's really just part-time. Myself, who visits schools a lot, and from our PBIS coordinator who is full-time, who goes out and coaches, works with teams, helps them look at their data, helps them develop strategies. One of the tools we use in working with their teams, and I have it here if you'd like to see it after the session, is a matrix that is a fidelity measure. It takes the components of Compassionate Schools and talks about if you're not implementing at all or little or no development, you're over here, and then fully implementing it is here. Most of our schools are pretty much still over on the lower end of that scale right now, recognizing where they are. We're going to bring them back in January, all of the schools that have been trained. We're going to go back through the matrix, see where they are, where they progressed, acknowledge their progress, look at their data about what they've done so far, look at their DESA scores, look at their discipline, their grades, what's happening in your building, and then help them kind of reset their task for spring semester about where they'd like to be by the end of the year. So it really is that coaching and kind of looking at the development of the schools over time. Our next steps is that for sustainability, we can't just depend on bringing Ron Hertel from Washington State. It gets expensive to fly him across the country and keep him for a few days. So he's going to come back and do a train-the-trainer model. So I'll have about 15 or so of my counselors, social workers, a couple of administrators who want to be trainers, who will be trained as trainers. So that once they are able to do that, we can then take the implementation better across our county. Rather than doing a training with 5 or 6 folks, we can kind of break the training down, do it over time, and do it more effectively within our own district. And then those folks who are the trained trainers can also become coaches, supports for the schools that are implementing. So I can free up a little bit of their time to do some coaching activities around it so that it's not just our grant coordinator who will go away in 3 years or a year and a half. It's not just me, it's not just our PBIS coach, but we have multiple coaches and models for supports for our students to do that. And then we continue to take every opportunity to take little pieces of this to our administrators. We're not implementing in middle and high school yet, but every time that we have a principals meeting, I've asked for 20 minutes at every principals meeting. I've asked for 20 minutes at every principals meeting. And I take pieces of what we're doing and I present just a little portion of what we're doing or a couple of strategies to do. Last month I did some things around comprehensive school counseling programs, or what the role of the counselor in leadership in the building should look like with this. So we talked about the leadership role of the counselor and the social workers to lead this work. Next, this month in December, we're kind of lightening up our meetings a little bit because it's right before the holidays. So we're going to go back to talk about that self-care component with our administrators. How do you balance your personal and your professional life? So I've got some of our trainers in our community resiliency model who are going to come and do some of that work with them. We're going to come and do some of the strategies and teach some of the strategies to our administrators. And then in January, I've already got the January meeting planned and lined up. I'm bringing 2 of our counselors who are doing the work in the schools, and we're going to come in and share what they do with their principals. So they hear it not just from me, they hear it from the folks who are doing the work in the schools. I'm the planner, I'm the organizer, they're the doers. They're doing the real work. So every opportunity that we can to set the stage for advancement across our district. What might it mean? It's that change that reflects that change in the paradigm, that change in how we think about what happened with our students as opposed to what's going on. Our social emotional curriculum using Second Step teaches, look at the alignment. Look at the alignment between what Compassionate Schools teaches and what the evidence-based model of Second Step teaches. It is an instructional strategy. So how do we integrate that into not just being something that the counselor teaches, but something the counselor may teach, but the teachers reinforce throughout the day, throughout the week. Because our counselors may only be coming in once every other week or so to teach a lesson. How can we take those same things that are taught and continue implementing them and stress them into what we do during the day? The Devereux, the alignment with the Devereux, and what does it measure? It measures the same things that we teach. So the alignment is there. The community resiliency model is something that teaches tracking, being aware of your physical sensations, what we talked about earlier, using grounding, using resourcing, teaching our students to recognize that there are positive experiences in their life that we can provide them, and using those as a sense of comfort. Use is something that's really interesting. All of us have gestures that we use. How many of you, the person who was teaching it talked about when she's really upset about something, she puts her hand on her chest. I was watching a video, I was told in the group last night, I was watching a video of a presentation that I did that I was particularly stressed about. And it was a group of folks that I was really, really uncomfortable talking to. And I sat there and I watched myself in the video doing this. Yeah. The motion of soothing myself was a gesture that I was using to calm myself. We all have those. How can we incorporate that into really getting back into control? Or if that's something that occurs naturally with kids, wrapping your arms around yourself. And sometimes our students with autism tend to rock. It is a self-soothing kind of thing. Not a bad thing, it's self-soothing. We all like to rock. You don't like to sit in a rocking chair and rock? Isn't that comfortable? Help now are just some really kind of the things that are really quick things. If we have a kid who really is losing it, I used to do this when I was teaching special ed kids without realizing what I was doing. Middle school boys, which is what I taught, middle school boys tend to have ability, that inability to keep their hands to themselves. You ever notice that? So what I started doing with our students is when they had to stand in line or when they had to be close to each other, I had them just simply push against the wall. If they were facing me, they pushed against the wall. What I didn't know I was doing at the time, my intent was just to keep them from punching or hitting or some of those things. What I didn't know that I was doing is that pressure on the wall was a grounding experience. It was actually calming and resetting their nervous system. So we often have folks do that because, again, they're not hitting somebody and they're getting in control and breathing. This is some of the things that we are doing. We are working on developing a common language. We are working on mindfulness. We integrated mindfulness the first time with our principals during a summer leadership retreat that we did for a couple of days. And I brought in a fellow from the community who runs an organization called Mindful Asheville, who kind of demystified mindfulness and took it away from meditation and toward being aware of what's happening in your body. Further considerations as we do this, we want to continue building on that knowledge of brain research. We want to examine our practices and increase those that teach self-regulation. We want to really look at our policies. I was in a school that doesn't talk about their trauma sensitive programming. They talk about PBIS. But I was in a high school in Shelby, North Carolina last Friday just to look at their PBIS high school model. But what I saw was a compassionate school. They have taken PBIS to a level where they're using restorative practices. They're asking the why. Well, do all kids get the same outcomes or the same consequences? Well, it really just depends. Do they have a behavior plan? Do they have a disability that's impacting that? Are they seeing a mental health therapist? And what do we know about where they come from? And it really depends on the outcomes. Is it fair? Yes, it's fair because we look at the individual. We look at that as having an outcome, having a consequence, having something that you learn from, but it's the right thing to do.